Hello everyone, welcome to our follow-up video from our live Q&A session on home education the other day. We're 2 months in now as I film this to the original lockdown, and now the second phase we're in where it's easing up slightly. Some children have gone back to school, lots more cars on the road, lots more activity in the shops. Some of you will still be having to exercise caution, and indeed as we all should be, and will be continuing to educate your children or encourage their learning at home. And there's still 6 weeks as I'm filming this now till the summer holiday. The idea of holiday and term time seems to have blurred a little bit into one possibly at the moment, so we might not be seeing such a kind of a strong distance. We had a big debate about what to call this session and the accompanying fact sheet, and we're very purposefully calling it home education or home learning rather than home schooling, because what we're all doing now is very different from school. We're not trying to replicate what school does, we're trying to encourage our children's learning during this break and to ensure as far as we can that they're not going to be disadvantaged when they go back. Obviously, their mental health and their well-being is absolutely of primary importance at the moment, and the more sort of formal learning stage might be taking a bit of a back seat, and I don't think we should be overly worried about that at this stage. We have to do the right thing for our children. There'll be lots of different circumstances and lots of different approaches to this. Some schools seem to be sending an awful lot of work home and have very high expectations on what the children should be doing, how they should be doing it, and how it should be sent back for teachers to oversee and monitor. And some people don't seem to have had very much communication at all with schools. So there's a huge kind of a variation in approach, and I'm trying to kind of tread a middle ground here to cover something for everyone. And of course, the age and the independence level of your children will make a difference. You might now be in a situation where some of your children are at school and some aren't. There's been a massive problem with the availability of carers, and young children and young people that need a lot of support at home might not have been getting that. So as parent carers, you might have been having a particularly difficult time trying to do the 100% of the caring role, the teaching role, and being absolutely totally responsible for all of your child's needs, which of course is a huge responsibility, and very tough on anyone, and particularly tough on single parents who are trying to manage all of this really on their own and without the access to wider family that we haven't been able to see for the past couple of months. And again, you'll all have different situations in terms of the environment, the resources you have access to, whether you're working at home or not, whether there's more than one of you working at home, whether you have internet access, where everyone's trying to access the internet at the same time. There's all sorts of particular problems that you'll be having to overcome in different ways. Okay, so I think the important thing is, there were quite a few questions in the Q&A session about children being anxious because they're not keeping up with what schools are sending. And in fact, if the schools are just sending the same information to all children, the children and young people with special educational needs will of course be struggling unless you are able to further break that information down for them, make it accessible to them if the school haven't thought that through themselves. So don't be worried about asking questions if you're able to of the school, especially primary schools where the class teachers, hopefully you'll still be in touch. There's 30 children, etc, etc. Secondary schools is trickier because you'll be dealing with a number of children, and each of those teachers will be in an average week teaching hundreds of children. So it is difficult to communicate directly with parents in those circumstances, but letting them know that the work is a bit overwhelming, not pitched at the right level, that your child isn't able to access it is perfectly acceptable. Don't feel worried about pointing that out. I think really the most important thing at the moment is offering our young people some sort of structure and keeping up their interest and motivation, helping them to understand that the situation we're in now isn't going to be forever, and encouraging their natural curiosity about things and about the world around them. there's a big debate in education that's been going on forever, really, about the idea of a knowledge-based curriculum or a skills-based curriculum, which of course is a false argument. You need both. But at the moment particularly, I think the skills-based approach, where you're encouraging your children to be interested in things, find out about things, and just stimulate their natural curiosity, is a useful way to do things. Not necessarily the sort of formal filling in worksheets, writing essays, or whatever. Encouraging literacy in any form. Reading as you go around, getting them to write lists of things and write things down. Maybe keep a diary of what's going on at the moment. Looking out for things, treasure trails, find 10 things beginning with a certain letter, and just encouraging those literacy and numeracy skills in an everyday way that isn't about sitting at a table with a pencil or pen and writing things down on paper. And other examples I thought of during the Q&A session was the mini bugs is a popular theme in schools, but finding out about a particular animal, what their habits are, where they like to live, what they eat, and things like that. Sort of starting off, the starting point being an interest that your child has, and building on that and encouraging those skills, research and study skills that are applicable in almost every area of education, and will be giving them useful developing useful skills that they will then be able to use back in school. There are different views as well on the idea of structure and timetables. There are some people that have said you should get your children up the crack of dawn and in their school uniform and treat the day very, very kind of formally. Well, that isn't going to work with most children, I don't think, but certainly not after 2 months, and certainly not with some children with particular additional educational needs. But I do think that routine and structure is important, partly because they're going to go back to having to get up at 7:30 or whatever in the morning, and it's going to be a bit of a shock if they haven't done that literally for months. So trying to split the day up into a sort of school type, learning type zone for some of the time might be a good idea and might work for your child. But again, you have to do what works for you and what's possible for you in your particular individual circumstances. But I think having some sort of routine, and so that it's predictable for your child and they know what to expect. It's not, are we going to do this, are we going to do that, and every day being a bit sort of just seeing what mood everyone's in or how we feel might be why it's ending up a little bit chaotic, and that the children aren't really wanting to do it anymore. They're maybe not thinking it's important, and having some sort of a visual timetable. This is a very kind of simple one for a younger child here, really, but you could do this with children of all ages, including teenagers. Divide the day up into zones, build the breaks in, building sections where they have choice themselves, and actually writing it down, either in a thing like this with pictures on it, if that's a bit more complicated, or just a simple list. You can just literally write a list, but writing it down and presenting it visually is actually much, much more powerful than just telling them. It gives it a sort of formalisation that is actually quite important, and I've found really, really makes quite a big difference. Similarly, with work being set from school, if you think it's too difficult or too hard from them, is there a way you can break it down into more simple steps, into asking some questions that starts them off, gets them on the right track, etc., etc. And it might be that you have to spend a little bit of time doing that. And again, you might, if you're working yourself, you're not going to have time to sit down and do the work with your child, and the schools should be understanding of that, because not everyone's in a position where they can give their child that level of attention all of the time, and certainly not if you have more than one child with different needs. Try to convey to the school if there is a problem, and to show them what you are doing. If your child's doing something else that isn't the set work but is really interesting and something that they've put a lot of time into, send the school that. Show them what the child's doing and why they're doing it. My mantra always was with my own daughter was doing something is better than doing nothing. And just that hours and hours of blank time and not knowing how to fill it is difficult for most children, I think. Having a space to work in is quite important as well, if that's possible. Not everyone has their own bedroom or their own desk or their own space, but it might be that you could have a little box or a tray or something for your child to keep their things in, so they know where they are, they know where to go to them, and you can put the work that you are using from the school in, or other ideas you come across and find, and encouraging them to have some sort of independence about getting this work out, and having their pens and pencils and colouring things available, etc., etc. And you've got to get the balance, I think, between being a little bit firm, perhaps, and being encouraging and nurturing and considering all of their needs, but not being overly soft and letting them off the hook if they don't want to do anything at all. I think trying to get this idea that school does matter, learning does matter, and it's important that their teachers are interested in what they're still doing, and is probably the best way forward. Put the wrong bit of paper down. Right, other things, having goals and plans to work to are quite important as well. That's why I think there's this idea of talking about when schools are going to go back, to give children a bit of an idea. So some secondary children might be going back to school a bit later on, before the end of term, and then for your other children, preparing them for the idea of going back in September might be the way forward, to do that now. Another thing that of course a lot of people are doing, obviously because it's been difficult getting the stuff in the supermarkets, is cookery. I mean, cooking is a great activity because it's kind of useful, and it doesn't have to just be about cooking and eating cakes. It can be, you can use it as a starting point to then talk about how flour is made, where flour comes from, different types of fat, butter, oil, where they come from, sugar, history of sugar, where does sugar come from? I mean, that could lead you in all sorts of directions. In this week particularly, the whole idea of educating children about racism has been incredibly important and high profile, and actually a simple act of baking a cake can lead on to sugar production, sugar cane, where sugar was harvested, and the entire history of slavery. There's there is no limit, really. You can go into the nutrition, you can go into costing, use it for maths. There's this idea of being interested in the world around you and understanding the world around you, I think is as good a starting point as any. So other things that as well that are important to be thinking about at the moment are the information and news your children are receiving. You want them to understand what's going on, appropriate to their age and level of understanding, but you don't want them to be so frightened that they're not going to be able to get back out into the world. So controlling the information they get, interpreting and explaining it to them as far as is possible is really, really vitally important. And if you're very, very anxious yourself and worried, then your children will take a lead from that and be anxious and worried yourselves. So as a family, having an understanding and understanding how to be safe is really very important. And that links to me to the internet safety aspect of what's going on at the moment. A lot of children might be spending more time online than they do normally themselves. So having an understanding not just of e-safety and how not to kind of get into trouble in terms of predators and posting information that they shouldn't do, or seeing things they shouldn't do. It's also, with older children particularly, understanding what's real news and about reliable sources, and this fake news and conspiracy theories and all of that business. This is giving us a really useful opportunity, I think, to look at some of that with our older teenagers, and that could be interesting project to be doing, comparing news sources and information and how accurate it all is. I think I mentioned diaries very briefly early, but that idea of making a scrapbook or a diary of what's going on now, that's another way to fill time that doesn't demand a lot of preparation or expensive resources or anything like that, and it can be a really useful thing to have to look back on. It's important to get physical exercise and build that in sometimes, to be going out and, a little way from home, even if you don't want to go very far, and getting air and physical exercise is really important to sort of shake off that pent up feeling, particularly with children with attention deficit disorder, and that sort of thing. That getting, or all children really, getting out and having a break and is absolutely vital. Okay, and having fun. Overall, a really, really important thing is to have fun with all of this. And if you're all getting stressed out as a family, arguing about school and what they're doing and what they're not doing, and or worrying about missing out on things and what the teachers are going to say, try to get that into perspective for them. Try to break the work down so that it is doable, it is reasonable, and you can demonstrate that your child has tried and they have done something. And do remember that the Reaching Families fact sheets are available on their website, that this is a summary of some of what I've said today, and also some websites and links for further information for things you can do with your children. And I also mentioned a book that is a really useful summary for supporting your children at the moment. Really cheap and easily available on Amazon. Rob Long and Kathy Evans. I've put the details on the Reaching Families Facebook page, but I do recommend this as a summary of the kind of things I've said here, really, but just as a reminder if you need it. But best of all, don't be too hard on yourselves. You can't completely replace everything that they do at school. Otherwise, we wouldn't bother with school at all, would we? Some of you might be home educators anyway, but do your best. That's all we can do in the circumstances, and don't risk your child's mental health or your own mental health by trying to do everything really, really perfectly. I'm sure you're all doing the best you can, and that's all we can do at the moment. So I wish you the very best of luck, and try to enjoy some about this time if we can. Thank you. Bye-bye.